are joined by the Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez. Also, he served as the former Labor Secretary in the Obama administration. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. I want to get your reaction to a job list. I want to get your reaction to the unemployment number, which, as you know, beat expectations. Is this a sign of a recovery to come?
We won't have a recovery until we fix the pandemic, Kevin. That's the reality. I want people to get back to work as soon as possible, and I'm heartened that people are getting back to work. The challenge we have here is that until we fix the pandemic and really do it at scale, we're going to continue to see record unemployment numbers. The job report last month, the numbers were driven largely by leisure and hospitality. That drove about 40% of the job growth, and the unemployment rate in leisure and hospitality went down to 28.9%. And these numbers don't capture what's been happening over the last few days. With the pandemic picking up, you're seeing other leisure and hospitality and other businesses having to shut back down. And so until we fix this pandemic, we're still going to be in big trouble. We're still down 14.7 million jobs since February. You look at the first-time claims for unemployment, again, released today. We are at the 15th week in a row where the claims are more than twice what they were at the highest levels of the Great Recession. So I want to get people back to work. We all want to get people back to work, but this president's completely failed handling of the pandemic is going to make that really hard.
Well, that's what I want to follow up with you on, because the president has made a case that in order to get the economy back on track, there has to be some type of reopening. But former Vice President Joe Biden has argued that in order for there to be a recovery, the virus has to be under control. How do you reconcile that, especially at a time in which you're seeing in some states another uptick in the number of cases of COVID-19? How do you convince the business community, convince Main Street even, that has to happen before we can get to a recovery?
Well, I mean, you talk to restaurateurs, and I talked to one business person, and they said something like, "We're just trying to figure out what we're going to do next week, what we're going to do tomorrow." There's no certainty here because there's no plan. This president, when you ignore science, I mean, a mask is not a political statement. A mask is a public health imperative, and the president has ignored that. So if you had leadership from Washington that was setting forth with clarity what we have to do, and this president is not doing it, we could get the economy rolling sooner. Look at other industrialized countries that have flattened the curve in meaningful ways because they took it seriously. This president hasn't taken it seriously.
Well, I want to ask you two more questions, especially from a policy standpoint. It's something you and I have talked about before. When you look at what has been going on in the UK, Boris Johnson has actually just approved another round of infrastructure stimulus in order to get the UK back to help the UK economy. I'm wondering if you think that there is an appetite here ahead of the election for there to be a major infrastructure package that Democrats would be able to get on board with that, or if it's going to have to wait until after November 3rd.
Well, I think what we have to do is pass the HEROES Act. That's a major investment. Republican and Democratic governors are calling for aid for state and local government. I live in the state of Maryland. We have a Republican governor. He's the head of the National Governors Association. He's calling for the President of the United States to pass aid for state and local governments. I agree with that. That has to happen. The HEROES Act contains really important coverage. People who lose their job lose their health care. There's this thing called COBRA. You can continue to pay for your health care when you're unemployed, but people can't afford to pay the COBRA. It's very expensive. The HEROES Act has a provision to cover your COBRA payments. People are going to lose their unemployment in the end of July unless something's done. That's what we need to do, pass the HEROES Act.
Well, and ahead of the August recess, you mentioned unemployment. This is the final question that I have for you, sir. Especially with minority communities, especially with lower socioeconomic individuals in this country. They have been disproportionately affected from an economic standpoint as a result of this recession. What can be done from Congress before August, or just even in the short term from a congressional angle, in order to provide liquidity to these small businesses and also some benefits for these Americans?
Well, the unemployment rate for Latinos at the end of the Biden administration was 5.9%. Today, it's 14.5%, 2.5 times larger. The unemployment rate for African Americans at the end of the Obama-Biden administration was 7.8%. Now it's double that today. The coronavirus has hit African American and Latino communities and Native American communities in a huge way. And what's the president's reaction? Let's undo the Affordable Care Act. Let's not support aid through the HEROES Act. Let's make it harder for small businesses to access PPP. You have story after story after story of small and minority-owned businesses who couldn't access the program, while this president won't even release data on the big recipients because they're all his buddies. We need a targeted program that assists, and the HEROES Act, again, would provide remarkably important relief that would help minority communities, minority business owners get back on their feet, people of color who disproportionately have pre-existing conditions and other comorbidities. They need access to healthcare, and we have a president that's trying to put a fork in access to healthcare. His failed leadership, what we have to do is at the ballot box in November, Kevin, that's where we're going to have to solve these challenges, because this president has been absolutely ineffective throughout this journey.
Tom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and of course, the former Labor Secretary in the Obama administration. Appreciate your time as always.
Kevin, good to be with you as always.